Hello and welcome to a new build report. It's been a while since my last video, because this time I didn't just build one or two, but 3 kits simultaneously. So yes, this build video will be a bit longer than usual, so feel free to check the timestamps if it gets too long for you. In 2024, Austria hosted its most recent airpower air show. As part of the event, 3 of our Eurofighters received special liveries. While Whiskey Alpha and Whiskey Delta, used in the combat display, got tigers on their vertical stabilizers, Whiskey Oscar was fully wrapped and dubbed the Grey Tiger. You can find some impressive footage of the airshow on my channel. I like these liveries so much, I decided to add all 3 to my collection of plastic scale models. I already had 2 Austrian Eurofighters, the famous Österreicher Draken, and an F5 in my lineup. Build videos for those are also on my channel. ModelMaker soon announced decal sets for all 3 versions, so I grabbed 3 Revell Eurofighter kits designed to match those decals. I had previously built the older Revell molds, which had issues in both 72nd and 48th scales. These newer molds are quite an improvement, though I had other problems with Revell, which I'll get to later. So as usual, I started with the cockpits. The instrument panel is a clear part, so I painted the head-up display in clear green and masked it with liquid mask. After painting the panels, I applied decals for the displays. Once again, I used the AK real color markers a lot in this build. They could be finer, but I find them much more convenient than brushing for small details. For the ejection seat handles, I painted wire in yellow and black stripes. I also detailed the cockpit knobs and switches. The result turned out quite nicely. Once the cockpits were done, I installed them between the fuselage halves. Up to this point, the build didn't feel much different from the older molds. Next came the exhaust nozzles, then the air intakes. After that, I attached the wing section to the fuselage. It's always worth working in sections and letting one area set before moving on. I had to fill a few small gaps around the engines. Don't forget to add weight in the nose to keep the model from tipping backward. This upper part or spine of the fuselage was a pleasant surprise, it fit really well. The air brake also fit much better than with the old molds. I still filled and sanded all minor gaps and seams to achieve a clean finish. Then came a setback in the building process. One of the wings was damaged, likely due to a molding defect. It doesn't look too bad on the camera, but it would have required sanding the whole wing and rescribing all of the panel lines. Therefore I contacted the Revell support and received a replacement. Unfortunately, it was even worse than the original. Not only did it have this huge hole, but the same area was affected again from a molding defect. Revell admitted that several parts had production defects. The second replacement got lost somewhere by the postal service, and only the third one was finally usable, even though it had minor flaws too. This was frustrating and delayed the build, but I appreciate Revell's effort nonetheless. Before finally attaching the wings, I cut out the flaps and spent hours and hours of scribing rivets or bolts using real aircraft plans as a rough reference. The wing-to-fuselage fit was surprisingly good, though I still filled small seams also here on the vertical stabilizer. The afterburner nozzles, on the other hand, required a lot of filling and sanding, my least favorite part of model building. Another annoyance also present in the old molds is the seam on the clear parts. I've shown how I remove this in past videos, but since people often ask me, first I scrape the raised seam with a hobby knife. Then I sand it down, gradually moving to finer grids. My finest one is 7000 at the moment. Then I use Tamiya's polishing compound, starting coarse, then fine. I wasn't fully happy with the result this time, so I already planned to treat the parts with looks like glass later. After removing the seams, I masked the clear parts using tape and masking liquid. I glued them with Ammo Ultra Glue. It leaves no marks and doesn't fog up clear parts like plastic cement does. Unfortunately, the fit here wasn't great. I recommend sanding the contact areas and filling any gaps. It's still quite noticeable in the final model. For priming I used AK's primer and microfiller again. It sprays well and is easy to clean. The rivets or bolts remained visible after priming. I wanted to emphasize these details with black Preshading. Since I struggled to airbrush fine lines consistently, I tried something else, using a black AK marker to trace the panel lines. This was much quicker and also more precise, as seen when compared the airbrush and the marker sides. Then I sprayed FS 36231 from MRP, a standard Austrian Eurofighter color. It's tricky to apply just enough paint to keep the Preshading visible without overdoing it. I liked the result and tried something similar on the second model using a white marker for highlights. However, the white marker didn't work as well. So here is how it looked like after several thin coats of the base color. Let me know in the comments what you think of this Preshading method. I'll definitely keep experimenting, but I'm quite happy with this first attempt. One unexpected issue occurred in some areas when the MRP paint along with the primer stuck to the masking tape. I'm not sure if it was due to the primer or the markers, but luckily it was easy to fix with more MRP. Painting continued with the flaps, slats, wing leading edges and flaperons, where I added small but noticeable details. I also painted the intakes, the nose and small areas like the outlets and anti-collision lights. The aluminum and dark aluminum markers were very useful. They matched the color tone of the engines well and allowed for precise application without any masking. Some panels still needed airbrushing, but that went quickly. Now with most of the painting done, I moved on to oil paints for weathering, one of my favorite parts. I applied small dots and blended them in the direction of the airflow using a dry brush. Where the effect was too strong, I toned it down with white spirit. I also added streaks at these tank connectors and the leading edges. The gear bays were given some definition with an acrylic wash, and I modified the paint tone of the engines with more oil paints. I probably overdid the weathering a bit, but Austrian Eurofighters have been in service for nearly 20 years now, so I don't feel too bad about it. Next came the decals. I started with all the small standstills and all the no-step warnings. Many were really tiny and tricky to apply. Since I was working on 3 models at once, this step took me quite a while. I won't go into my decal workflow here, I have a full tutorial video for that. Anyways, the ModelMaker decals were great, though there is a mistake in the guide. It places the Austrian roundel on the wrong wing. Just watch out for that. However, the decal quality is excellent. The rudder decals need to wrap around the curved area, so I trimmed the front section and painted the rudder tip black in case of gaps. On a wet surface, the decal slid into place easily. I followed the same process on the opposite side and, of course, on the second Eurofighter of the combat display team. Of course, you could apply the decal in one piece, but this way worked better for me. After that, I added a few more kit decals. With decal softener, everything settled nicely into the panel lines and curved surfaces. Also, the rivets and bolts were still quite visible underneath the decals. Don't forget to uncover and paint this little outlet here. To finish the 2 combat display Eurofighters, I applied a wash to all panel lines and the rivets. Yes, it got pretty dirty, but in the end all the panel lines and rivets were subtly accentuated. Before starting the third jet, the Grey Tiger, I filled a huge cockpit seam and scribed the rivets and bolts again, since they remain slightly visible even underneath the decals. At the MoZone model show, I met Philip from ModelMaker, who gave me the brand new Grey Tiger decal set. Huge thanks again. The quality is top notch, and again I noticed that these decals can be moved around several times without any damage or tearing. I pre-painted some areas underneath the decals, in this case black. Philip told me this wasn't necessary, but I wanted to be safe in case I tore a decal and exposed the area underneath. I began with the cockpit area, but made a mistake. The decal didn't line up perfectly with the clear part and should have been 1 or 2 millimeters further back. I would now recommend starting with the fuselage decals, or at least placing that first decal more accurately. Anyways, I worked my way rearward. There's a cutout in the decal for the anti-collision light, which is nice. However, be aware that this area here isn't black. I applied the decal first and trimmed around it with a blade, but this wasn't ideal. The decal stuck too well and had to be scraped off. Fortunately, it was easy to repaint using markers. This time I tried applying the rudder decal in one piece, but it was hard to position, so I ended up trimming it mid-process. Even after building multiple special livery aircraft, this is still a huge challenge. It's important to stay calm and adapt to unforeseen problems. I divided the opposite side decal into 3 parts and it worked much better for me. Next I tackled the fuselage side decals. Unfortunately, placing the very first decal too far forward led into more problems here. No matter how I adjusted it, it didn't line up. I eventually accepted the 1 to 2 mm gap. My mistake carried over to the wing decals, which produced a visible gap at the rear of the wings. Fortunately, the decals were very durable and didn't tear despite all the torture I gave them. I did my best to fix these transitions. The small gap at the rear wing and fuselage remains, and while it's minor, it still annoys me. Oh, and another thing to watch out for again is not to forget to cut out this outlet on the rudder and the APU exhaust on the left wing. I used reference footage from my own Grey Tiger videos to place the rest of the decals accurately. Again, some were tiny, and by now I was really looking forward to the end of this build. However, I still spend a lot of time to fix more areas using spare red, white and black decals, which are provided in the decal set. For example, I messed up the national flag stripes here in the front. So I cut red and white pieces to the right size and layered them carefully. To hide the rear wing gap, I extended the tiger stripe pattern using AK markers and paint. So from a distance you can't really tell that there was an issue here. Then came the final details. I painted the landing gear tires and hubs with markers. Though the white one didn't cover well, so I used the brush for those areas. The landing gear was slightly weathered with a wash and glued with super glue. The main gear needed trimming to fit and was a bit fiddly to align. Then I painted and decaled the pylons and drop tanks, and man, some of these decals were really tiny. I get why some modelers skip them, but I feel every detail should be there, just like on the real jet. The two combat display Eurofighters were equipped with 2 Iris-T missiles each. Unfortunately, Revell doesn't include any decals for them, so I raided my stash of decals and found some from an Academy F-15. They didn't stick at all, so I used plenty of decal adhesive and softener. The Grey Tiger was displayed with empty pylons only. Finally, I removed the clear parts to finish the cockpit and polish them again. Then I treated them with looks like glass. It doesn't do any magic, but it gives a nice shine to the clear parts. And that wraps up the build of these 3 Austrian Eurofighters. People often underestimate how much work goes into making these videos. I also put a lot of effort into the photography and editing while trying to keep things compact and still informative. Sometimes I spend entire nights just editing all the footage filmed throughout the building process. For example, I had about 3 hours of video footage that I trimmed down to this build review video here. Anyways, that's why I would really appreciate every comment you leave, be it positive or critical. I know these Eurofighters aren't my best work. I went a bit too heavy on the weathering and the Grey Tiger decals didn't go perfectly. The issues with the Revell replacement parts also dampened the fun. While the new mold of the Eurofighter is a definite improvement over the older one, there are still quite a few gaps that need to be addressed. Also, I wondered why the ATD sensors under the nose are no longer included in the kit. Still, I'm happy to expand my Austrian Air Force in 70-second scale. Here are the Eurofighters alongside the Osteriki Draken and the F5. If you're interested in any of them, check out their build review videos on my channel. and as usual you can find more content on my Instagram and Facebook pages. Thanks again to everyone who leaves feedback, and special thanks to Philip from ModelMaker, Christoph from Wolf3D, and the designer Chris Erhardt for these amazing liveries. Without you guys, this project wouldn't have been possible. So that's it for this quite long video. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.